45 kilometers east of Cairo, deep in the Egyptian desert, an entirely new megacity is rising from the sand. This is a 700-kilometer skyline, an area roughly the size of Singapore that didn't exist a decade ago. The estimated price tag for this massive construction is $58 billion. For that, the government gets the iconic tower, the tallest building in Africa, sprawling diplomatic quarters, and the brand new presidential palace reported to be 8 times the size of the White House. Look at this photo of Old Cairo. This is what the government is leaving behind. Over 22 million people live in this metropolitan area, and the infrastructure is collapsing under the sheer density. Traffic moves at less than 10 kilometers an hour. Water pipes burst, and power grids regularly fail during the summer. You might think a new city would relieve that pressure, but a standard apartment out in the desert costs roughly $60,000. Meanwhile, the average annual income in Egypt is less than $3,000. The math is unyielding. By building luxury villas far beyond the reach of the general public, the government is creating a $58 billion fortress for the ruling elite to escape the very population they represent. To understand why the state is fleeing into the desert, we have to go back to 2011. Millions of Egyptians poured into Tahrir Square, successfully ending Hosni Mubarak's 30-year rule. The geography of Old Cairo itself made that revolution possible. The city is defined by its narrow, winding streets. For millions of protesting civilians, those tight corridors acted as natural fortifications, allowing them to barricade themselves against heavily armed security forces. Notice where Tahrir Square is on this map. It sits directly next to the parliament, the cabinet building, and the state television headquarters. By taking this single open space, the public physically paralyzed the entire state apparatus in a matter of hours. The military regime learned a permanent lesson from that uprising. The urban density of Cairo is a geographic weapon that inherently favors the population. The surest way to disarm the public is to simply pack up the government and leave. The new administrative capital is structurally engineered to be the exact opposite of Cairo. The first and most obvious layer of defense is the sheer distance. The state has placed 45 kilometers of empty desert between its ministries and the general public. If an ordinary citizen wants to protest at the new parliament, they have to take this $4.5 billion state-run monorail. The government controls the only bridge over the desert. At the first sign of unrest, they can cut off access with the push of a button. Even if a crowd manages to cross the desert, they will find the city highly compartmentalized. The government district is geographically segregated far away from the residential zones, protected by heavy security perimeters. Compare Cairo's tight clusters on the left to the blueprint of the new city on the right. Look at the vast connected avenues of the new grid. You cannot build a civilian barricade across a massive multi-lane highway. There are no central gathering points adjacent to centers of power. The open space is engineered to force crowds to dissipate. This architecture completely strips the working class of their geographical leverage. Beyond the concrete layout, the city is hardwired for absolute observation. Over 6,000 high-definition cameras are being installed across the streets and plazas, feeding directly into AI anomaly detection software to monitor traffic and track crowd behavior. At the center of this intensely surveyed fortress sits President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and the Egyptian armed forces. The military has always held immense power, but here it is literally cemented into the ground. The Ministry of Defense is moving into a new complex called the Octagon. Spread across 22,000 acres of sand, this highly classified installation is significantly larger than the Pentagon in the United States. But the military's role goes far beyond the new headquarters. They effectively own the entire megacity through a corporation called the Administrative Capital for Urban Development, or ACUD. This chart breaks down who actually profits. The Ministry of Housing owns 49% of ACUD. The Egyptian military owns the controlling 51%. When this company sells desert real estate to private developers, the armed forces collect the profits. The city provides the regime with an impenetrable desert bunker while establishing an unprecedented mechanism to funnel state land sale profits directly into the accounts of the military elite. Funding a $58 billion city is difficult. When foreign investors from the Emiratis pulled out shortly after the project was announced in 2015, the Egyptian government stubbornly decided to find the money themselves. They turned to Chinese state-owned construction firms to build the central business district, bringing in billions in foreign loans to keep concrete pouring. But those loans have to be repaid. To finance the rest of the city, the state borrowed heavily, issuing sovereign bonds and taking multiple bailouts from the International Monetary Fund. Over the past decade, Egypt's national debt has exploded to over $160 billion. Look at these banknotes. To meet the IMF's conditions, the national currency has been repeatedly devalued. By 2022, the Egyptian pound lost more than half its value against the US dollar. Inflation surged past 30%, and state subsidies on basic food and fuel are being slashed. A massive portion of the state budget now goes entirely to servicing the interest on this mounting debt. The regime is bankrupting the working class and mortgaging the entire economic future of the country solely to pay for its own isolation. As thousands of government employees begin their commute to the new ministries, the physical and economic separation is complete. Historic Cairo is systematically being left behind, functioning as a massive, crumbling container for millions of poor citizens. Rulers have done this throughout history. In 17th century France, King Louis XIV moved his court to Versailles. In 2005, the military junta in Myanmar relocated to the remote city of Naypyidaw. They frame these projects as administrative necessities, but they are mechanisms of self-preservation. Moving the state does not make the nation's problems disappear. The 22 million people in Cairo are still there. The traffic is still stalled, and the poverty is deepening. A moat of sand and 6,000 cameras cannot protect the government from a collapsing economy. The regime spent $58 billion trying to solve the geometry of control. They built a fortress to guarantee an uprising like 2011 could never happen again. But by crushing the broader economy to pay for it, they may have inadvertently engineered the exact economic desperation required to ignite the next one.